Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you're in for a big treat today because I'm in for a big treat today. We have Rob Greenlee. Rob, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. I'm honored to be able to join you on your podcast. So thank you for the invite.
So, you've had some new stuff going on over the past, couple of years maybe, and I wanted to start with asking, what are you up to today?
It's kind of a mixed bag of a lot of different stuff. I'm working with podcasters, content creators at various levels and various stages of activities and working on a couple of podcast networks. And I'm also the chairperson of the Podcast Hall of Fame. So doing a combination of a lot of different things, but all rooted in things that I've been working on and doing for the last 20 years. So I'm definitely still living inside of my passion area and what I've dedicated the last 20 plus years of my life to.
So you touched on two of the key things I wanted to visit with you today, and they really were outgrowths of conversations started by Todd Cochrane after podcast movement. And that was what I'm going to call the evolution of podcasting, but it was started off with, are we creators? Are we business people? I have
Right.
two networks as well. Am I a business person? Am I a suit? Is there a tent big enough for us all? And I just wanted to maybe explore all of those things because you had a prescient comment that was, hey guys, this is the way it's been forever, essentially. Not
Yeah.
to quote you too closely, but
Well,
we've
yeah.
been doing this for a long time. So maybe I just wanted to ask about the evolution of podcasting, and are we at a different place now?
Yeah, I think we're always at a little bit of a different place than where we were. I think that's kind of like a life statement more than anything else. All of our lives are journeys, and the podcast medium it has been on a journey that has a lot of ups and downs and changes and perceptional adjustments that have happened over many years. And so I think podcasting where it is today is in some ways is, for me anyway, personally, I can't speak for everyone in this regard, but is a little bit of a back to the future moment. Somewhat, this is not always well understood in the medium, as a lot of people are really focused on video now, when we just went through a little over a decade of a focus on audio. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when podcasting started, in the early years of podcasting, audio and video were almost equal in its utilization as well as its publishing. And so in some ways we're kind of going back to what we have been in the past. YouTube and podcasting have been on a parallel track for 20 years. If you look at the birth of YouTube and you look at the birth of podcasting, they're actually fairly close in date. I think it's only off by a year. And so it's been a parallel track, and it's just ironic to me because I was working in the medium back when podcasting was audio and video in RSS, and then it was YouTube that siphoned that off and captured a lot of those video creators over on their platform in the early years of podcasting. And that's what caused podcasting to kind of evolve into being seen as more of an audio medium. But now we're coming back full circle again, and now it's people are wanting to do video with their audio podcasts now.
So I play in two worlds, both reflected in my podcast networks. One is a very niche world of legal and regulatory compliance, and then a broader world of podcasting. And in the legal and regulatory compliance realm, I saw a business evolution similar to what I'm seeing in podcasting now, where a large
Mm-hmm.
number of companies, then a consolidation, and then a breakup of a larger of companies to more consolidation. And so I'm really interested in the business evolution of podcasting, and
Okay.
what are some of the things you're seeing there?
Yeah, the business side of it has definitely been growing in its importance. It's always been there since the early days of podcasting. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but an increasing chunk of content creators or podcasters, and it was the term used in the early years, would like to make an income from their podcast. And so the business side has been growing in its importance over many years. And in the early years of podcasting, really the business side was very unsophisticated. It didn't have a lot of processes. It didn't have a lot of businesses actually that were related to podcasting. So That's been the evolution that's happened more recently, is the entrance of more and more individual companies and content creators thinking themselves as being media companies of sorts. That's a little bit of an evolution that's been happening for a while now, and we're starting to see individual podcasters that are building media companies around their personal brands and the content that they're publishing. And then we saw the entrance of a lot of the major radio networks into podcasting that has had a significant influence over the commercialization of podcasting, as really the influence of broadcast radio networks into podcasting has been pretty profound around the business side of podcasting, because those folks could see the future, and the future looked less broadcast and more podcast. And so a lot of those networks bought podcasting companies and started doing more deals with podcasters and becoming more advertising centric or monetization centric with the content that they were doing over there, so they could grow their revenue on their company side as they saw the broadcast side kind of erode and lose revenue. So they could see this transition happening. So you have those kind of tensions in the medium, and then now you throw into the mix which was also involved in the video podcasting side in the early years, a lot of the big video networks too, ABC, NBC, CBS, all these guys in the early years of podcasting were involved in publishing video podcasts back in those days. I worked with a lot of them in those days, back when I was working for Microsoft, and I was working on the Zune player, not Zoom, but Zune, which was a portable media player back then that had a large media screen. I ran the podcasting area for the Zune at Microsoft for 7 years. And so video was a big component of what I was working on at Microsoft from 2007 till I left 2014. So I was there during that whole time frame.
I'm a huge advocate that every business, perhaps even every business professional, should have a podcast. But my second network, I live in a rural part of West Texas, and so I have a rural focused podcast network. And the closest town to where I live is 20,000 people, 3-day-a-week newspaper, no TV, no radio. And so I'm trying to educate business owners that social media marketing is an adjunct. It won't supplant, but it's an adjunct to everything you do. And the demographics of my county are 35% of the county's over 65.
Yeah.
And they're all on Facebook. And so I'm like, why not create some social media marketing from a video pod and put it on Facebook? So I see a huge upside to businesses having a podcast and what they can do with that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think most businesses could benefit to some degree from having a podcast. I think social media has, just like you said, it has an opportunity, as well as search has been an opportunity for small business and businesses for many years. That's kind of how I got started, and everything that I'm involved in with the internet now is I started doing search engine optimization for small businesses back when I first got started. That was before I even had the nationally syndicated radio show that I did for 6 or 7 years. And that's what got me into this in the early years of technology and search. So what you're talking about here now, and increasingly we're hearing this conversation in podcasting, talking about how podcasting can be utilized for local advertising, local businesses, to drive local attention, just like what local radio did for many years. And so that's increasingly a conversation as we think about how niche down content can be. There's no reason why podcasting, with the current level of adoption of podcast consumption now, we've reached a threshold of the ability to have mass consumption, which means that in any given local market, you could have a fairly significant penetration of consumption of an audio podcast or a video podcast in your local community. And in the early years of podcasting, that wasn't really possible because there were so few people that consumed digital content in any given local market that it wasn't really large enough to be able to be considered part of a business or a part of a marketing effort or that would drive value. But I think we're coming into a time when it's ubiquitous out there. It's very rare now that I have to tell somebody or explain to someone what a podcast is now.
In the corporate world, I have seen a couple of examples of companies that did essentially in-house podcasts communicate to their employees. And
Yep.
my favorite example is, so I come out of the legal and regulatory compliance world, and culture is very important. And one company actually improved their culture through their podcast based on the following.
Yeah.
That they had corporate executives who talked about what they did, and senior executives, or the executive leadership team, as I would call them. And the employees responded because most of them had never met people on the ELT. It was a
Yeah.
50,000 size employee base.
Mhm.
And so it actually drove culture because they felt like they got to know the ELT. And to me, that's the power of audio, that something about audio allows you to have an intimacy with both the host and the guest.
Mhm.
And with the guest, if you don't know them. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of effort over many years around corporate utilization of kind of like behind the firewall of sorts type of content being produced to support advertising sales teams, customer support teams, just like you said, trying to maintain a level of communication between the leadership team and their employees, of keeping people up to date with what's happening with the company, the changes, the mandates, or things that are happening inside of those companies that everybody needs to know about. I know some companies really had listening to these podcasts was kind of mandatory. Everybody had to tune in and spend a half an hour listening to the HR people or the sales team or the CEO or whatever, with, let's say, a quarterly update or something like that they could share with their community. And podcasting was one way of doing that. And there are platforms today that are available that can create private podcasts, right? Ones that are only accessible through a password protected login or an SSO of sorts that can secure that content to a limited number of people inside of a corporate network. And that's been utilized quite a bit. It's not talked a lot about, but I don't know how widely it's still supported out there, but I'm assuming that it's still being done at quite a few larger and mid-sized corporations. So.
I'd like to turn now to the Podcasting Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And I think you were inducted in 2018. But you also, 2017. Okay. And then, but you have a role with it now. I'd like to start by asking you, what did it mean to you to be recognized by your peers like that?
Well, it was a great honor. It was one of those things that you don't really think about. The Hall of Fame was started in 2015, so I definitely knew about it for a couple of years before I got inducted. There was a class of people that were inducted prior to me that were very deserving of being in the Hall of Fame as well. So I felt very fortunate and lucky to be recognized like that. It is, it's always an honor, but it also is a sign of you've kind of reached a pinnacle in your career of sorts, and it may be all downhill from there. So it was one of those things that was a little bit of a mixed bag, but it was also an honor to be on stage, and I felt the need for that type of recognition and type of sharing, really, of the origin stories of podcasting, how pioneers in this medium really built their reputations and built their shows and built, because not everybody that gets inducted is a podcaster. They can be people that work behind the scenes, ones that built platforms, ones that had influence over the development of the medium too at a significant level. And that's what the Hall of Fame is really all about, is trying to recognize those people that maybe weren't front and center on microphone, but they were behind the mic of sorts, doing other things that were impactful to a large number of content creators and audiences.
You now have a role at the Podcasting Hall of Fame. Could you tell us what that role is and some of the challenges that you're facing going forward?
It's a volunteer position, and it's always been that way, as I'm the current chairperson of the Podcast Hall of Fame. I've overseen this. I believe that this will be my fourth Hall of Fame induction ceremony that I've overseen. And just I bring the values of the organization or the 54 people that are inducted in the Podcast Hall of Fame to date, rooted in its foundation. I started podcasting when podcasting started. I was part of that first group of shows that was a part of the medium. And so I knew personally, I knew a lot of the people in the Podcast Hall of Fame today, going way back to 2004 when I started. So a lot of them, but there are others that have been inducted that are newer to the medium as well. And so those folks have really been a foundation to what podcasting is today. And I think one of the challenges that the Podcast Hall of Fame is that it tends to be a historical look, which is not surprising given if you look at all the other Hall of Fames that are out there too, they are rather historical in orientation in an environment which likes to recognize people that are of current importance. So it can be a little bit of a climbing or swimming upstream type of a scenario that you're trying to drive awareness to people that had an impact maybe before a lot of people out there had any kind of knowledge of what a podcast was. So, right.
If I could ask you, Rob, to maybe look down the road a little bit to 2030 or maybe in between, where do you see podcasting going?
I think podcasting, like always, has been swept up by the technologies of the day. Tech has always had a big influence over podcasting. It's a digital medium, so you would kind of expect that. So I think elements that are increasingly important are artificial intelligence, and that's going to bring and continue to bring profound opportunities and changes to the medium. And I think the emphasis around monetization and creating brand companies that are putting out podcasts. I think if you look at some of the fast growing companies that are involved in podcasting right now, they're not really traditional media companies. They're media companies that are very rooted in individual personal brands. And that's an interesting change that will probably revolutionize everything. And especially in the context of AI, we're going to see a certain chunk of audience be attracted to artificially generated content. I think we're already seeing that play out to some degree in YouTube. That's already starting to, AI generated content is going to be a significant chunk of the audience attention and consumption will come from that kind of content. Now, it's very controversial. There's these terms like AI slop and the ability to create content very easily and cheaply and have it sound a little robotic. But I do say when people say that and talk about AI content in that way, that the AI content that you're consuming today is the worst it will ever be. It's only going to get better. And the better is somewhat of a subjective view. What is better? Is better more, which means that maybe we need to still focus more on the human created content. But I think it's going to be a balance. I think that there's going to be creators that are going to create AI content from their human avatars. And then there's going to be human created content. And I do think it's going to be increasingly labeled. So people will have a choice. They'll know when something is AI created and they'll know when something isn't. I do think that's going to increasingly be a presence here. And then the aspect of the importance of humans in creating podcast content is going to be an interesting tension here, because as AI gets better and better and better, and humans don't really get better and better, right? The AI could catch up, right? And what happens when the AI catches up and is able to replicate me, just like what I'm talking about right now, exactly, right? Is it going to be that smart? I don't know that we have the answer to that question. I don't really consider myself to be so good that I would be better than the best AI. So audiences may be attracted to AI generated content if it sounds and acts like what they think a human sounds like. But these are really core questions to the podcast medium as we look forward to the future. But I do think that there's also another element of this is there's going to be, like you had mentioned, consolidation. And I do believe that the power of distribution and the power of monetization is going to be with a smaller and smaller number of platforms. I think that's the unfortunate outgrowth of all of this, is that the power is going to shift towards the big power players of today increasingly. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but I do think that the power of YouTube is going to continue to escalate.
Rob, I'd like to end by asking you about Todd Cochrane. I know he was a close personal friend of yours. He was a giant in our community. And maybe what did he mean to podcasting? And maybe a few of your personal reflections of Todd, if you could.
Yeah, Todd was a man of an earlier era. And I think that is probably a great place to start talking about with Todd, is that Todd had very, very grounded and rooted values in what podcasting medium was all about, because that's how he started. He started as an independent creator. He started a show in 2004. It wasn't on the radio. It was just him pulling up a microphone to his laptop and talking into it and sharing information about technology. And that's what he was rooted in. And he was a passionate advocate for independent creators, which means really translating that into reality is anyone has a voice, and anyone is enabled to have a voice via RSS and podcasting. And that he was an advocate for owning your own distribution, your own .com, your own presence online, and really doing the best that you can to be a good member of a community of sorts and foster community and foster relationships with other people and other humans and increase and add value to their lives. And so he created this platform called Blueberry, which was rooted in very early fundamental elements of podcasting, which is open RSS and creating a platform that was open for anyone to participate in for free. But also he had a platform that was paid too, that had higher levels of metrics and analytics and the ability to host the content off of a professional hosting platform, and also have monetization capabilities built into it. But Todd was really a fierce advocate for innovation around RSS and where it was going and how we could improve it and how we could keep independent podcasters front of mind as the corporatization and the professionalization of podcasting was starting to consume the medium, which has been going on for a few years now.
He was also a very close friend of yours. I think you all did a podcast together, and maybe end with
for 13 years every week. Yeah. So I started working with Todd back in 2005. I was one of the first group of shows that joined his tech podcast network that he started. And I saw him start the podcast awards, and he had his own Geek News Central podcast. And so I was a part of his team of sorts that went to conferences like CES and produced video content in the early years as well. So he was fully involved in live video and doing online video stuff. And that's where the term new media show came from, is that we were talking about on that show new media, not just podcasting. So we were talking about video and cameras and gear and all sorts of things that were kind of geeky and techie, which is a lot of the early years of podcasters. And I'm included in that, as guys that like to tinker with stuff. And so that's what his root is. And he helped a lot of people over the years. He gave it very wise, sage advice to a lot of people getting started in podcasting. And when he passed away, it was really a phenomenal upwelling of kind of grief and sorrow and appreciation for the hard work that he put in to build a platform that was rooted in people.
Rob, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I wanted to ask you if any of our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out more about what you currently have going on, what might be the best place or places for them to go.
Yeah, I have a bunch of things going on. I have a YouTube channel at Rob Greenlee, and that's Greenlee. And then I also have a website, robgreenlee.com. I have a podcast network that I'm working on too. It's called adorenetwork.com. And I'm increasingly working on another podcast network called passionstrucknetwork.com. So there's a variety of projects that I'm working on trying to support podcasters and continuing to do the work that I've been doing for 20 years of being an advocate and a person that can help people get involved in this medium and to take it to the next level. Or you can reach me on email, robgreenlee@gmail.com would be a great place to reach out to me as well if you wanted to reach out. Thank you.
Rob, once again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to visit with me, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.